And so I trace it through, and I say at the beginning of the chapter, you know, there's a good reason why the Washington Monument is the premier symbol of Washington. And some of these things, you know, you never escape from. I was just reading the paper on the way here, and there's a New York politician in this case of Jeannie Pirro, which I don't know if you've followed, but she is being accused of thinking of taping her husband, who she was afraid was being unfaithful, and her whole political career is kind of going up in smoke. And you know, a male politician was trying to defend her, and he goes, well, this is her husband, this is just what men do, this is just what they do, it's nothing, he just was having a little affair at the country club or something. We shouldn't get too excited. So, but it's fun to look at all the sexual scandals and how they, you know, again with Anita Hill, I think that everyone thought that men in the Senate would be incredibly sensitized and everything would change. And now Jill is dealing with our lead of the paper tomorrow, which is a Republican congressman named Mark Foley, who has been caught sending salacious emails to male pages on Capitol Hill. And what our reporter was describing as electronic masturbation. So, Washington and sex, you're never going to get around that.
The two of us are, you know, among us, still a fairly small number of women at the top of the New York Times. Maureen is, of course, our only woman columnist, and in the galaxy of political columnists, at all publications, she's one of the few, you know, really strong female voices. And whether it's journalism or, you know, we've been following with rapt attention the downfall of Patricia, you know, Dunn at Hewlett-Packard. And she succeeded Carly at Hewlett-Packard, and for a while they were, you know, among the very few women CEOs in the business world. Are you still surprised that there are relatively few women at the top? And in your trade, which is opinion, politically related columns, why are there so few women out there still, do you think?
I have a chapter on this in the book. It's, you know, I had a really hard time becoming morphine into an opinion columnist and having instant opinions, and I try to analyze it in the book, and you know, it seems unjustifiable when you think about it that the Times only has 1 out of 9 as a woman. But one of my girlfriends, who is the deputy Outlook editor at the Washington Post, did a wonderful piece on this, and she said she spends a lot of time trying to persuade women to do opinion pieces, and she'll call them and they'll be like, yeah, I really need a few days to think that through, or you know, I've got to take my kids to a soccer game, let me get back to you in a couple days. And she said whenever she calls men to do an op-ed piece, they're like, oh, fine, I'll cancel the family vacation, you'll have the piece right in the morning. And you know, that they know exactly what they want to say, and they will not let anything get in the way, and women are just much more handle it much more differently. So you know, there are more male bloggers, there are more male TV shouters, there are more teenage boys who trash talk on the basketball court. I just think that I've interviewed you know, people who are experts in myth and folklorists. The famous one, Alan Dundee's at the University of Berkeley, and he says that men are just used to the art of verbal dueling. But when a woman starts it, there's a visceral reaction like, get back to the kitchen. We don't want to hear what you have to say about this. And I do think the reaction to a woman criticizing men in power is much more personal. It's like very sharp, you know, they get very angry at me. Whereas when a guy does it, it's like, well, that's his job. Okay. But I don't want that to sound like whining. I'm just saying there are gender differences which prevent women from doing it with as much alacrity, perhaps, but that doesn't mean you can't recruit harder and get them. But what Jill mentioned is really fascinating. I don't have this in the book because it just happened, but you know, it's just really fascinating to look at Hillary Clinton's change in her management style and at the Hewlett-Packard thing, because Hillary Clinton started out on healthcare almost with a very alpha male management style. You could almost say Cheney-esque. It was like she failed because it was my way or the highway. She didn't have any of the softer, you know, her husband tried to step in sometimes and take some of the congressmen involved to golf and a beer and schmooze them, but then she'd meet with them and she'd say, no, you've got to do it my way, and the whole deal would fall apart again. And she wasn't listening, and it was very secretive. And then when she got to the Senate, she took all of those lessons and she has completely changed. But what's interesting is she's using ancient feminine wiles that have worked for women with men through centuries. She is fetching older male senators coffee, like she used to fetch Strom Thurmond his coffee, and she will step back and make sure they can get in the forefront of pictures so that their egos can be flattered. And a lot of, you know, sort of, with Robert Byrd, she went and flattered him and said, oh, you have to run a class in parliamentary tactics for the freshmen. And then she brought, and he is renowned for making these really boring speeches on the Senate floor about Mother's Day. And so one day she brought her mother by his office and said, oh, my mother wants to tell you how much she loves your Mother's Day speeches. And the guy will do anything. When she called him and said, we need money for New York after 9/11, he was like, how much? And when can I deliver it? And she goes to the prayer breakfast with conservatives, and a lot of her base gets really angry that she's doing legislation with conservatives, and they feel like she's pandering, and she is on things like flag burning amendment, because how many flags are burned? It's ridiculous. But she has successfully changed her image to someone who listens and works with the other side and gets legislation through. And so she went from the alpha male approach to this sort of ancient female wiles approach. And then you look at Hewlett-Packard, and Carly Fiorina did the alpha male approach. She was sort of a bully. She didn't listen to anyone. She just rammed stuff through. She didn't bring all those qualities that you always think women are going to bring. And now we have Patricia Dunn, who is being, you know, accused of having stereotypically feminine kind of sneaky subterfuge. Instead of just confronting the male board members with her suspicions that they were leaking, she went behind their back and hired someone to spy on them. So, you know, I was interviewing a male business consultant, and they're all very sympathetic to Patricia Dunn. They say, oh, well, she couldn't get in the boys' club, and that was the only way she could do it. But at the same time, they say it's going to be a long time before Hewlett-Packard, a very progressive company, might try another woman, because they've had these two huge disasters. So, to me, you know, they're only 2%, I think, of is it 2% of Fortune 400 companies, or is it 11? 11%? 11% are run by women. And, you know, we just got our first female news anchor. I don't know when we're going to get a female president. I mean, I think things are moving very slowly in many ways for women, and I think it's just interesting as a reporter to watch them struggle with what is the right management technique for a woman. And Hillary is running, and she's still kind of, you know, trying to get that right, and it's just a very tricky thing. And in her case, you know, and in Jeannie Pirro's case, they also have to worry about, you know, are their presidents suddenly going to, I mean, are their husbands suddenly going to blow up their campaign in the middle of the campaign? So there have to be whole strategies for what happens if Bill is caught with another woman, and how do they deal with that. So that's, you know, there's just very, like everything with women, it's all very complicated, but all very fascinating.
With the Woodward book just coming out and dominating the headlines the past 2 days, I need to take you back to Bush World, your first book. Maureen kind of singularly was onto Bush World and had, you know, such a fabulous take on Rummy and Cheney and the rest of the constellations surrounding President Bush.